it was about a month after the wedding. We were on a camping trip with a bunch of the people that I worked with, awesome friends, and Kev was zipping around the campground in the middle of the night, and I was fast asleep in our tent, and they said, "Kevin, are you high?" And he just said, "Yeah." He just owned up to it. And they didn't tell me that night. We went to work a couple days later, and they said, "Sweetheart, your husband has a drug problem. Like, your husband's an addict." And I was like, "Yeah, right. He's just a newlywed, and he's, what do you mean?"
You were loved by God. All right, Kevin and Dawn, I am so glad that we are together to have this conversation. How are things down east today?
Beautiful.
Well, it's beautiful, beautiful, hot, sunny day, and it's actually maybe even too hot, but we're loving it. We're working away outside and getting the recovery center up and ready to start ASAP. So
amazing. If you were going to tell somebody, I'll start with Dawn and then Kevin, why people need to go down east, why people need to explore and connect with the East Coast, what would you say? Because I'm a big fan, but a lot of people in Canada, I can't believe, have never been to the East Coast.
Yeah.
So why? Tell me.
It's just stunning, first and foremost. I just adore the geography here. It's got so much to offer. People think very small, and it's really not. I mean, there's beaches absolutely everywhere. I think there's more lakes in Nova Scotia than anywhere in Canada. Like, it's a crazy amount of water in this province. A lot of water here. And the people, they're just fantastic. It's true what they say about maritime hospitality. They're just absolutely lovely here. So very neighborly. If you like seafood, that's a plus.
Yes, I do. Lobster rolls, Digby scallops. Yeah. I mean, I could go on. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin, what about you? East Coast?
I'm all about the ocean seaside. I take every waking moment to find different parts of the province to see the rugged, beautiful coast here, and I just enjoy that. Any given weekend, we're usually taking a shot somewhere an hour away. That's the cool thing. It's small enough that an hour and a half away, you can be in a totally different part of the province, which is incredible.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what I think? I've always thought this, like loving and enjoying where you live. Mm. I think that's important, the landscape, what it has to offer. And if I could, I honestly have thought, like, would my family, would Chris and I ever live in the East Coast? I mean, my parents had a cottage there for over 13 years, so that was amazing. Every summer we'd be in Nova Scotia off the Bay of Fundy. Right. So anyway, I'm a big supporter of your land province experiences, 100%. So I'm really glad you're in this conversation as part of our SOS series, and it's a Summer of Strength series. And as I was thinking through, like, who are the people and stories that need to be featured, you both came up pretty quickly in conversations around the table with our team. And I think you have so much to offer and to share in strengthening people and in a few areas, in addiction, in recovery, in the why and how, and then for Dawn, for you, in just, how to be and be in relationship and support and stick with and all that when somebody is going through, addictions. So I think, and I know your story will really connect with people and will help people. Because I had a friend say, I need to hear this story because I'm actually currently in recovery. Right. And I just want to hear stories so that I don't feel so alone and I feel connected. So let's start from and when I say beginning, Kevin and Dawn, and maybe you guys can go kind of back and forth, but maybe a little bit about, just sort of the love story and then how the addiction and what you're addicted to happened. So I don't know who wants to start. Dawn, Kevin. Okay, Dawn starts with the love story, and then we'll go into.
I like that.
To Kevin.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Starts great.
So we met extremely young. Kevin was 19, and I was 23, and I had just recently, within the last 6 months, found Jesus. I grew up in the church, but didn't have a personal relationship with Christ, and so I was a new believer. And I had been praying into my future and into meeting the person that I would marry and build a family with, and that he would be a godly man, because I had really gone off the rails. I was not living a healthy life at all when it came to relationships. And so we actually met in a food court, very romantic setting. He was 19.
Woo!
And
You got to give context there. You got to
yeah,
give context.
talking bread at one of the places in the food court, and people say love at first sight, and others chuckle, and we know for us that's exactly what it was. It was this instantaneous. I had stopped dating for a number of months and been praying for the one, not just anyone, but the one that God wanted me to be with, and there was just this magnetic firework moment. And he went home and told his mom that he met the girl that he was going to marry, or saw the girl. He hadn't even met me yet. And I went back to work to my girlfriends and said, I'm not dating and I'm living life differently now, but if that boy asks me out, I'll go out with him. And we were engaged 4 weeks later.
So picture, I'm shelving bread. My job as a bread man, I'm shelving bread in a food court at the mall. And I look over and I see a girl who I'd never met before. And I ended up getting her number from a lady who ran the sandwich shop. That is how it all began.
And engaged after 4 weeks.
Wow.
4 weeks of dating. He put a ring on my finger, and we were married 5 months after that. Now, what I didn't know at the time was he professed to be a believer, and he very much looked like one. He knew how to act the part. He came to Bible study with me. Everybody who met him fell in love with him and just thought, yes, like this makes total sense. You two are super young, but you're such a fantastic fit. This is a God thing. Maybe you pick up here with what happened a week before the wedding, Kev.
Yeah, so interesting thing, like I had grown up in the church, and when I met Dawn, I had been... Let me back up. I had fallen away from my upbringing at a young age, 16, 17. I walked away from God, church, all that stuff. But I knew I wasn't living the life that I had been raised to be. I knew I wanted to go back to my Christian ideals. So I was partying and trying different drugs and different things like that. And when I met Dawn, I was dabbling and selling a little bit of drugs and just different stuff. Not a horrible thing. I wasn't a drug addict, but certainly just a stupid party life. And I met Dawn, and I said, "This is the girl I've been waiting for. I want to drop all that stuff and go back to my roots." And so when I met Dawn, she's going to church and Bible studies, and I put on I joke, I call it my God facade, because I'd grown up in church. I knew exactly how to act and what to say. Mm-hmm. But I would say I didn't have. I can't say I had a heart connection with Jesus. I don't believe I was, walking it out with the Lord, but certainly knew what to say and how to act and all that stuff. Anyway, a week before we got married, I'm getting up at 2 a.m. We have family in town because I worked in the middle of the night, and I ended up trying crystal meth for the first time. My brother actually offered it to me, and it seemed, he hate that line, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And what happened was it made me feel amazing, invincible. I can stay up all hours of the night and the day. Really, you never sleep, and get a lot done. And at first, it seemed like an incredible thing. Just a typical, as you may have heard drug stories before. It promises, fun and all the things, and then it just steals everything from you. So a week before the wedding, I get hooked on crystal meth. I was hooked pretty much right away, and I walked down the aisle, sweating my face off, as high as a kite, and that was the beginning of a 4-year-long journey through drug addiction in our marriage.
Do you ever think, Kevin, when people start drugs, do they ever think that they'll get so addicted? I don't know, but is it, you try it once, it makes you feel good, and that's what happens? Most people must not think, oh, I'm going to become a hard addict if I just do this once. Because if they did, would they do it? I know that sounds sort of simple, but...
No, nobody picks up an opiate nobody picks up heroin for the first time and thinks, I want to be a hardcore drug user. No, it makes sense. I get the question.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was actually talking to a colleague of mine the other day, and he was uh, he was listing off some statistics about meth. He's a realtor locally in the area here, and he was just chatting to me about you know the success rate or the death rate of people that get hooked on the stuff. And he's like, man, if people only knew, they would never try the stuff. And I said, people know all the stuff, but nobody assumes they're going to get hooked on it. They just assume they can just try it, do it once, do it twice, do it on the weekend, whatever. That's where the lie of drugs comes in. Is it's so heavily addictive, and then you add that to feeding some of the brokenness in your life, and it's a perfect storm for addiction.
Yeah. So talk to me. You get married, and Dawn, you don't know, or when do you start realizing that he's addicted to crystal
He was
meth?
off for sure on the day of the wedding. But you have to remember he's 20, and it was a pretty rushed, right? This is 6 months after we've met, and people have flown in from other provinces for our wedding, and it was, an anxious time for sure. Happy anxiety, but also everybody was just like, oh, it's cold feet, sweetheart. He'll be fine. And it was about a month after the wedding. We were on a camping trip with a bunch of the people that I worked with. Awesome friends. And Kev was zipping around the campground in the middle of the night. And I was fast asleep in our tent. And they said, Kevin, are you high? And he just said, yeah. He just owned up to it. And they didn't tell me that night. We went to work a couple days later, and they said, sweetheart, your husband has a drug problem. Like, your husband's an addict. And I was like, yeah, right. He's just a newlywed, and what do you mean? And I went home and kind of thought about it, prayed about it, and asked him, I said, do you have a problem? Do you have a drug problem? And he owned up to it and said, yeah. And he told me what was what. And I mean, he started the week of the wedding, like he said, and he was instantly hooked. And so, yeah, it was a bitter pill to swallow. This is the guy that I've prayed for, and he's answered prayer, and I knew it in my heart and my spirit. I knew he was the man that I was supposed to be with. I knew that my vows, that I meant them. And even though I knew he was kind of at the beginning of the very messy stages of addiction, I knew he meant it when he married me too. And I thought, what the heck? What do I do with this? How do I be 23 and, yeah. And that was the beginning of kind of what it looked like to investigate, which I'm sure a lot of people want. Like, what do you do when you hear a loved one is struggling and at the beginning stages of addiction? And what does that look like? And who do you tell? And, what's the best resource? And do you go to a counselor? Or do you go to rehab right away? He's only been using for a little while. It was a journey, let me tell you. Yeah.
Did you feel, Dawn, you could tell anybody, or were you like ashamed, or did you want to keep this a secret?
I
like,
was
like
not.
how do you tell after you just get married?
Yeah.
Yeah, my husband's addicted to crystal meth.
Yeah, and I wasn't then at that point. I'm not that type of person. I don't care a ton what other people think. Like, I know that's
good for you.
But
good for you.
I cared about my marriage, and I cared about Kevin, and I cared about our future. But you have to remember, you're not alone in this. Like, for every addict, there's a mom and a dad, and there are siblings, and there are coworkers, and there are employers, and there are pastors, and they're right. Like, it wasn't just my story. So it's a really good question, because everybody kind of navigates it differently, and some people hold it all in because of career or children or pride. There's all kinds of things that factor into it, and so I was pretty honest with the people in my circle. Kevin's family, now looking at it 22 years later, I can 1,000% see why you would not want to tell people, because I think you can't help but feel like you're somewhat responsible when your loved one starts, and you're not. Let me say you are not. It's an individual choice. But as a mom now of a 20-year-old, if she told me she had a drug problem, I would self-reflect. I just would. And so I think that all factors into it. I mean, it's a mess. It's a mess. It's something that no one ever thinks they're going to have to deal with. Good Christian boy, brought up in Christian schools, and, they did all the right things in so many ways. And, it's a really tough thing to walk out. There's no doubt about it. Go through it all.
So, Kevin, you tell Dawn, yeah, I'm addicted. So let's want to hear a bit of the story. I mean, so you say it to her, but clearly that didn't change anything. It wasn't like you came out and then you're like, yep, and now I'm completely going to stop cold turkey today. And, obviously that didn't happen.
Well,
So what happened in
I
that
was
after you talked to her, and then what was the story?
probably a little foggy exactly verbatim, but I remember
Yeah.
pretty clearly saying, something to the effect of, "Oh, I got this. I can fix this. I can fix myself, and I can quit, no problem." It's very very typical. We always think we have control over our lives, and with a drug like crystal meth, like many drugs, you really don't have any control anymore. You've actually given up that control. That was once you put that into your body, and it actually just changes you. It changes you, and your ability to actually make sound decisions anymore. It's overtaken by the addiction. The same people, most people get up and have a cup of coffee every morning, because if not, they feel horrible by 10 a.m. I'm not saying coffee's bad. I love this stuff, but that's just kind of the way it is. And anyway, long and short of it, tried to get off of it, and there was no possible way. Ended up going to my first bit of rehab. I went to a 30-day program. In the first few months of our marriage, and that was really tough. Young guy, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in rehab. This is lame. I've really failed in my life. And so a 30-day rehab program, a recovery thing, and I remember after a week of that, I knew everything. I was such a smart aleck. And I remember telling him, "Oh, Don, I'm good. I've learned so much." I remember telling all the guys in my groups, I said, "Guys, I've learned a lot here in this week, but I've got to go back to work and go back to my life. I'm good." And that's what you do when you're 20, 21 years old, and you think you know everything. And sure enough, that was an epic fail. And thus the journey, the cycle of the broken in and out of rehab, it would start to steal my life in increment after increment. And I say that what happens is you start doing pretty well, because I was raised well. I was a good guy. I'm married an amazing woman. I had great values and goals. And then what happens is the addiction gets worse, and your morals and your ethics, they keep dropping off. And what you considered okay to or wrong to do, then it could be the next day seems like it's okay to do. And then that goes for many areas, whether it's being faithful, whether it's stealing, whether it's what you would break into, maybe it's how much substance you put in your body, what you would say to a person. Vile things would come out of my mouth as the addiction got worse. And of course, I turned to a life of crime. We lost everything. It stole everything. It stole all our money. It stole complexion. It stole self-respect. Stole relationship with my wife and my daughter and my family. And that's what it does.
And Kevin, for someone who, doesn't have and understand the addiction, I sit here and go, how can you let that take your life? And I know it sounds, again, so simple, because somebody from the outside, you always point fingers and we're like, why and how? But I guess that's why it's an addiction. It's so strong that you will give up everything for that high or for that feeling. Is that right? Because to me, I'm just like, you've got a family, you just said crime and faithfulness, like all these things that really are bad things. That if you step back and you were like, why am I doing this? I'm ruining stuff because I need to get this high. I mean, maybe just take me into that understanding for people who kind of don't really know.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were just talking to a young guy the other day. Actually, he came to our center. He was talking about coming into the Helm, and he said, "Yeah, my girlfriend doesn't understand it. She just thinks it's a choice, And yes, it is a choice that you'd make every day or multiple times a day. However, it literally takes control of here and takes control of here.
So your mind and your
supersedes, the practical, if that makes sense. I often say this, but I fell in love with Dawn. There's no question, and I love her to this day. Only by God's grace we're even together. However, she was my first love, and it transitioned. My first and only goal every day once I was hooked on crystal meth was to get that in my body so I could feel that way. I could get that high. It just does something to you. It steals, and there's like the actual physical element, there's the addictive element. I also believe, absolutely, that there's actually a spiritual element too. I believe that there's like an oppression over your life that happens when you're in drug addiction. It just takes control. But that's the idea. There's a Bible verse about the enemy is there to steal, kill, and destroy, and that's exactly what it does. Drugs fueled all those things. So,
wow.
There's also something to be said. I just want to add this is that once you're in it, then the shame comes in, and it's like, well, I've already done it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, when you've started doing something, it's like, it was a weird one to watch because it was, shame does things. It just does. It just gets in there, and the enemy does a really good job of telling you that, well, now you've done it. Now, right? Hey, Ken? Like, it just...
Oh, for sure. No turning back. I remember I was in such a pitiful state. And at this point, and so somewhere in our relationship, Dawn went to the East Coast. I was back in BC and living my life. And I remember she came back for Christmas to see me, and I was in the middle of my mess. And I remember seeing my wife and daughter after I hadn't seen them for months, and the shame that came over me. I was so tangled up in all the stuff, and I was way worse off than I'd ever been. And that just drove me back further. It's what you go, oh my gosh, that's what I could have had.
It's like the cycle.
Here's the picture of what I could be, like this perfect little family situation. And here, my pitiful, I'm sick. I'm absolutely sick, and I'd rather just stay sick than try and face the music. So.
Wow. I'd rather stay sick than face the music and work hard. I want to go back to that, but Dawn. Kevin just said, he's out west, you're out east. What's going on? Like, I mean, for some people, they'd be like, I don't want anything to do with him. Like, we're out. Like, what in the support person in seeing this, what's going on with you and trying to keep this marriage together, but
and so
what was happening?
I knew that I wasn't going to divorce him, but I couldn't stay. Like, that's kind of mentally what I would come to. We had our daughter at this point. She was 1 year old, one and a half. And I just, in working with people in addictions and the loved ones of addicts for about a decade now, I guess it is, everyone has a line. Like, we all just have a line that you just, once that's crossed, we're done. And for some people, it's 15 years. For some people, I've walked it out with people where it was literally, over a decade that they stayed in the situation. And for me, it wasn't so much about the years. It was about the safety of our daughter. And there was a day where something in me broke. He actually took her out for a walk in her stroller. And he smoked a meth pipe right in front of her. And this is a 1.5-year-old who doesn't remember it, obviously, but very, very smart little girl, and was taking everything in, this little human sponge, and that just did something to me. I just went, no, this is where, as a parent, I'm not going to divorce you, Kevin, but now I'm done. Like, now I'm going to actually spiritually, physically, financially, I am taking the reins. You had your chance. You said you'd get help. We're at like 2.5 years, 3 years at this point in this. You've tried a bunch of different rehabs. Now we're going to try geography, and I'm taking Taya, and I'm out of here. And you can come and follow and try and get a whole new life and a clean slate. Or the choice is yours, but I'm going to do what I have to do to keep her safe, because it wasn't safe. His thievery was, had escalated to crazy heights, and just his morals, like he said, were out the window, and he was never home. And when he was high, and he just wasn't even safe to be around. And so, we came back here to Nova Scotia, and he did follow, and he lasted a couple of weeks. Ended up picking up Ritalin in one of the playgrounds from a kid who was skateboarding or something to try and get high, because he couldn't find meth in this sweet little Nova Scotia town in the middle of nowhere.
Hmm.
And that's when he went back to BC, and it was the 6 months later that I came to visit him. And my goodness, the difference from when he left us here in Nova Scotia in 6 months. I mean, he was emaciated, and here I was hoping, you know, I'm bringing our daughter out to see him. She's 2. It's her 2nd birthday. Maybe we can salvage our marriage. And he was worse than ever. It was awful. That was for sure the worst Christmas of my life. It was awful. I wish I hadn't come, actually. I'm sad that I ever saw him in that state.
Kevin, what are you thinking then? Like hearing, I mean, I know you've heard this before from Dawn, but when she came to see you, and I guess because you just said that, you know, drugs, you know, impact your mind and your heart, soul. Is there, when you saw this, saw your child, was there any connection like, oh my gosh, what the heck am I
For
doing?
sure.
Or was, you know, like you said,
I mean, I was still fully in love in, how do you word that? I guess I wanted to be in love with her because she was my beautiful wife, my beautiful child. I was just so helpless. I couldn't love them the way they deserved. And when you feel so helpless, you just go right back to the poison that keeps you there. I remember very clearly them at Christmas or the day after Christmas. They're at my mom's house, and I was literally out stealing a car that night while they're in the home. You know, getting back at 6 a.m. and trying to sneak around, and it was just like the epitome of like a bottom dweller. I reached new lows, and you know, so embarrassing. Like just a bottom of a pit, and feeling like you're very low. That's the best word I can say.
yeah.
So now I'm
I
not
was losing at life every chance I could get.
So I'm married to someone I not only don't love, but I'm repulsed by, and I'm bordering on hate at this point, because anyone that could leave us here in Nova Scotia and go back to drugs, and then when we come to see you 4, 5, 6 months later, this is what we're met with. I just thought, man, like short of a miracle, like and even then, divorce wasn't in my vocabulary, but I had no interest in him. I loved him as a human being, and kind of because he's God's kid, but not as my husband. That's for sure. He had really severed it for sure.
Yeah. So we're sitting here at a place, and I get it. Like, you are not having it, Dawn. You're looking at him. He's emaciated. He is at the lowest of low. So what happens? Like, what then happens? Because something obviously, for our listener, it's like, well, it sounds like they're still together, which you are, and in the work of the Helm, I want to talk to you about a little later. But what was the point where things started to get better? We're starting to get healed.
Yeah. I came back to Nova Scotia, and Kevin ended up racking up somewhere around 40 criminal charges.
Is this like break and enter or like that kind of stuff, or stealing?
Anything?
Okay.
Theft and drug related. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. 40? 42.
Yeah. 42.
Okay, first I thought you said 14. I'm like, that's a lot, but then they were like 40.
42 or 43. It was up there a lot.
No. And
wow.
His record was squeaky clean because, like we said, he grew up in a Christian home, good schools, did all the right things as a young boy. And so he'd get picked up and then released again, right? They'd print him and then set him loose and give him a court date or, you know, one of these promise to appears. And so he just kept racking them up. And then at some point he ended up, they ended up putting him in a cell for over a month. Have you pick up here?
There was a morning.
So after 42, they finally bring you to jail? Is that what happened?
So they didn't pick me up 42 times. They picked me up a handful of times, but every time they pick you up, like when I say pick you up, when the police would take me into the station, they'd give you a handful of charges. So you can get picked up 6 or 7 times, and if they give you 6 or 8 charges every time, you know, once you get picked up by the police one time, they give you conditions. So then next time you get picked up, if you're breaking those conditions, whether it's curfew, whether it's having break and enter tools, having drug paraphernalia, all those things, you get all those charges doubled again. Like it just keeps this cycle going. So anyways, not to make light, they were all charges, there was a pile of them. And finally, there was one morning, I remember it as clear as a bell. I was pulling out of a condo parking lot on a main drag in Langley, BC. And I remember looking in my rearview mirror, and the second I hit that main road, the cop lights went on behind me, and my heart sunk. I knew, and in no way, shape, or form was I getting out of this one. I was going to jail, and I was not coming back. I knew there was no way that they were going to they were going to know. Like, so I got pulled over. The police officer recognized my vehicle because she pulled me over before, and she was wondering what I was doing driving around at 6 a.m. pulling out of a parking lot, a place where I'd been picked up before. Anyway, that was the last day I was a free man for a while. They brought me into pretrial jail. So they brought me to basically the jail before prison, and that's where you sit and you wait for your court date. And very humbling position when you actually get thrown in prison or in jail, and you start to face the music, as they say. I got a lawyer. Started to hear the consequences for my charges, for all the foolishness and all the addiction. And when they started telling me, hey man, do you realize you have 42, 43 charges? The Crown is going to be seeking after 5 to 7 years in prison for you. Wow. And you go, oh my goodness, what have I done to my life? Addiction has, like, talking about stealing, it stole everything. And then it was going to take a huge chunk of my life again. And that was, we talked about rock bottom before. New low for me. New low, young 23-year-old, absolutely broken guy in jail. And I was broken, weeping consistently, sobbing on the phone with my wife constantly.
Don't leave me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, he'd call bawling every day. No divorce, please. You promised no divorce. And here, he's my answer to prayer. And somehow, God, you expect me to take my 2-year-old and visit her father in prison for the next 5 to 7 years? Are you kidding me? This was not what I signed up for.
Yeah, I know.
Like, that isn't what we talked about. What is happening right now?
Yeah, God, what's happening here?
And so,
yeah.
So we prayed behind the scenes, and we did a lot of work with Kev's lawyer, knowing full well that his decisions were a byproduct of his addiction. He's not a bad human being. He's a drug-addicted human being. And knowing that incarceration was not the answer, that he needed a shift in his spirit and his morals. And so we prayed and worked with the lawyer, and actually found a place in Nova Scotia, here, a 1-year addictions recovery farm that would take him. And they had things like carpentry and animal care and things for him, like new skills for him to learn. And so we basically pleaded with the judge, hey, would you consider, in lieu of jail, sending him to this place? And so
that sounds okay. Great, but crazy.
Yeah, so that was the plan going into a courtroom, but the bigger, better part happens in a jail cell. And so here I am, absolutely broken, just feeling the weight of the world, the weight of my sin, essentially. I ended up going to a church service in jail that just one time. I went to a church service one day, talked to the priest, and I picked up one of those little tiny Gideon's Bibles in this church service. And I ended up taking that Bible back to my cell and started to read that like my life depended on it. And, I'd grown up in the church and even Christian school and the whole thing, and ended up like, you go, man, I thought I knew the Bible, but truth is, I never really heard God's voice until I was desperate. I started to read God's truth, and I started to literally hear God's voice speak into my life, and I knew I was ready for a change. And so there was one particular day, the guys all went outside to go to yard, and I held back in my cell, and I got down on my knees beside, just a pretty typical, you can picture this scene, on my knees, Bible in my hand, begging God for help. And I said these words. I said, God, I'm in a mess. I know this wasn't your intention for me. And I said these words, if you get me out of this jam, I promise to serve you forever. And I remember it as clear as a bell. And it was in those moments that something happened. Well, a miracle happened. I don't know how else to explain it. A miracle happened. There was you talk about being saved or transformed or renewed. God did something in those moments in my heart and in my mind. He gave me clarity. I believe in those moments that He removed that addiction that had me so tangled and so wrecked. I believe He removed that from me and gave me a new heart and gave me a new hope in the future. And I remember even getting up from that prayer and just feeling lighter, feeling better, I'm in the jail cell and I'm feeling positive. I'm feeling something new. And so much to the fact that I remember, and it's kind of a little side story, but there was another guy in my cell, and he got beat up for eating too much bread. This is the picture of like living in jail. He got beat up for eating an extra slice or two of bread, and he was whimpering, and I felt so bad for the guy above me. And I remember this was like the start of my journey of like witnessing and like kind of preaching. I remember he was up there, and he got beat up pretty bad. And I remember I said to him, I said, hey man, he's up in my bunk above me. And I said, hey man, do you pray? He goes, no. I said, well, you should. This is like a day after I prayed, I'm like, something happened in here. He needs to pray. So anyway.
I think it was the change in Kevin and hearing it. I couldn't see him, but I could hear it in his voice. Like you could hear that he was a new creation. And I think that was the catalyst for us actually working towards getting him recovered like that. It gave us the push that we needed. When he said, there was a defining moment. He called me, and instead of whimpering and begging me to stay with him, let me talk to Taya. And I, I'd always say, no, you got to call her when you're of sound mind, Kev. Like she can't hear her dad like this. And he called this one day, and his countenance was completely different. And I said, what is up? And he just said that he had been praying, and he said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know we're going to be okay. And that was, he had this encounter with Jesus, and he didn't even go into specifics with me at that time, but I knew that this is a different human being I'm speaking to. He's a different guy. God's doing something here. And so Incredible. It wasn't long after that, like I said, the judge said, yeah, this guy needs recovery. And he basically said, get out of my province. And the next day Kevin was on a flight and came to us.
But what are the chances of that? Like, wait, so you've got these charges.
So
as far as they know, you're drug addict, B&E, stealing all these things, and you're supposed to go to jail for 5 to 7 years. Is that right?
That's right. So here I am. I'm in BC. My wife and daughter are in Nova Scotia. I walk in, 42, 43 charges, whatever.
42,
yeah.
Right.
I pleaded with the judge I pleaded with him essentially for grace, and he granted me that. I ended up getting 11 charges. Out of those, most of those charges ended up being dropped, but I got stuck with 11, and I was sentenced from Surrey, BC, to Halifax, Nova Scotia. They said, get out of my province, go do recovery at a farm for a year in Halifax, and go be reunited with your family. And
what are the chances of that? That to me sounds like not a chance at all.
He said he was the first. Like that was the first time that judge had ever done that. I don't think it had happened. He was one of the first people to ever be. Yeah. I
remember him saying these words. He said, "The system has failed you. They should have seen you were a drug addict the first or second time and not let you back out. They should have known you were going to reoffend. It's not your, and that's what happens with drugs. Once, especially if you're into crime, you can't. You have to support yourself with something, and you're not going to go to work. Yeah. So
you're going to do crime. Now, question: have you ever gone back or found that judge to say thank you and tell him what your life has been like now, or has there ever been an opportunity?
Those are two people that I'd love to connect with, and actually, I've never gone down that avenue. The judge and the police officer who pulled me over. Those are two people I'd love to.
Well, that might be a story if you ever want to talk to me, because I think that'd be a really great reunion story. Like, I think, yeah, and I think for them to hear about the decision they make, because they probably have hundreds and
Oh, sure.
thousands of people that they're doing, but to hear where you guys are now and the impact of what you're doing would be probably like incredible for them. I just encourage you because I think that that's a great
Good word.
story. Talk to me if you decide to do
Now
that.
you set the flame in motion. Now I gotta act on it. And
Okay,
Don's like, she knows I will too.
Yeah, he will. He totally will.
so you unbelievably, you are now sent to Nova Scotia across the country. Get out of our province. And what happens? Is it honestly instantaneously where you were like, I don't want to do drugs anymore? Like, I think for some people are like, wow, okay, so you got this opportunity, but can you just stop drugs and needing that high after like something like that happens? What happens?
So I say this, and I say this with absolute honesty, and with, I know this for a fact, and this is not everyone's story. So I over the years I've been cautious how I say this. In my particular story, I believe God removed addiction. I have never, ever once obsessed, thought about, gone back to crystal meth. I've never even crossed my mind. It was like something changed in that moment, and I just turned around and I never went back.
How many years have we got now?
That was 18 years ago. 18 years ago.
Whoa! 18 years.
Different story. I wish that was everyone's story. It's not. It is many people's story.
No, I know. Yeah, no. Yeah, and I think that's good. I mean, any story that I hear, or even my own story, I do say, this is very unique to me, right? Like, this is not everybody's, people may have been adopted or people may have done this, but not everybody has the same story or outcome. So I respect what you're saying, but that's your story.
Yeah, for sure. And there's also some like external factors that happen in that. We moved across the country. That's a huge thing. Total different scenery, new set of friends, new set of rules, new home. Focus on my family, focus on my life and recovery, and making like strong bonds with good people who mentor me well, and even right down to like guys I'd work with who like I could look up to and weren't creeps, and I was very, very blessed along the way. And so I gotta, it's not just all one thing and it's just like everything's just a miracle. Sure. It's actually like it was some wise choices, but also some favor in my life that I had. And certainly, I think geography was a big thing too. Moving away from the bad haunts, right?
Yeah. Dawn, now he's going like, okay, obviously trust is a big issue through this time. So as much as that's a win, prayer is answered. Now he's coming back home to Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
What's your process for this? And I think that's because I just to support the people who are listening, going, I'm supporting. I'm in a relationship with an addict. What does that mean? Like, how can you just trust again? What was the process for you in that?
You don't. I would say that it took twice as many years to heal as it did to be in the mess.
Wow.
Okay. So this isn't an overnight. We're not healing overnight. This is hanging on for a long time. And you know what it's like when you heal? Like every day gets a little bit better. Like it's not like it was horrendous for 8 years, but it was horrendous for the first 1.5. And then it kind of just started to get a little bit better and a little bit better. And time and prayer, and you can rebuild trust. I am proof that you can be in a completely shattered marriage where you not only dislike but do not love or like and actually hate your spouse. And if you hang on and you are meant to be together and God is in the mix, you can have an amazing marriage that's better than before. And so I was stuck with a human being that I didn't want to sleep with. I didn't want to kiss. I didn't want to hold hands with. I didn't at first it was awkward being in the same room with him. I wanted to, in that you're wrestling with being supportive because you are his wife and you are the mother of his child, and you are giving him access to your 2-year-old again, and visiting him in rehab. And it's, we went through it. It took a very long time, to get to a healthy place. It really did. As hard as it was, for me to hang on, when he would beg me to stay with him and not divorce him and just stick it out, and it was going to get better and I will quit, the roles reversed. And then it was me saying, hey, this isn't you, this is me. You're better. You've been released and you are free from your addiction, but now you have to wait on me because I'm not better. Like, this is going to take me a good long while. And so he had to return the favor and just be patient with me and hang on and wait for God to do all that he had to do in my heart, and to teach me how to forgive him and how to trust him, and how to at some point start to give him the spiritual reins of our household and our life again. And that does not happen overnight. It was a very drawn out process with a lot of amazing godly appointments of people in our lives, and small groups and pastors and family and prayer and time, and just working through it.
That is so beautifully honest, Dawn. That is so refreshing to hear that, because I think, and I'll say that sometimes things like this happen. It's like a God moment, and we're like, okay, and everything was better, but it's not. There's so much healing and things that have to be untangled, about that. And what I hear for both of you, I mean, the God piece is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about the story and think, wow, if there wasn't him, God sort of like orchestrating and behind the scenes, and I don't know where you guys would be.
Not together. For me,
I was going to say, I don't.
Yeah, it's that I prayed for Kevin, and I felt in me that regardless of whether he was a mess at the beginning or not, he was who I prayed for. And so there was that. And then there was, the Lord very much was at the center of our vows. It wasn't just the two of us on that day, whether he was high or not. We took those vows in front of our friends and family, but more importantly, in front of God. And it was a vow. Like, a vow is a vow. I think we just throw them away now, but like, it's a vow. It's called a vow for a reason. And so, that was my vow before God. And so I took it very seriously. And I do not for a second sit in judgment of people that have to get out. I don't for a second. I have walked out divorce and recovery with countless women. And like you said, everybody's story is so incredibly different. But that was my story. And I knew that I was accountable, right, for my life and my marriage. Without God, there is no Kevin and Dawn, for sure. We would have been long done.
So you come back. I'm going to fast forward because I have 3 questions to ask you as we're talking about strengthening, and then I want you guys to talk about the Helm. So I think it's really important that our listeners, support and get behind you guys in the work you're doing. I think that's really key. So if you were going to say, Kevin, to someone who is addicted, who is in the throes of addiction, it not only is not at the bottom, but just beginning, what would you say to him or her in that space? I know it's different, right? Because there's one who's starting and then somebody sort of in the middle and somebody who's kind of like really at the bottom. But because I know there are people listening that are currently right now.
For sure.
In the throes of
I would say, you're playing with fire and you think you can control what you're doing, and you will not. There will be a tipping point where you can't go back. And if you're at the early stages, your likelihood of actually just getting some help, maybe a counselor, maybe weaning off in a way, and getting real right at the beginning is way wiser than letting it draw out, because it will destroy your life. That's the reality. That's why we're in the rehab ministry. So,
yeah. Okay, Kevin, what about for someone in recovery? So they've made the choice, they're in rehab, they're in recovery, but struggling. And some, on one side, they think of it every day, wanting that high, and others are, feeling hopeful. What would you say to that person in recovery as some encouragement?
I always go back to the God element. If you get up every morning and you trust the Lord with your life, if you actually can make habits of actually spending time talking to God, reading God's word, and building that relationship, I believe that will guide you through the darkest times, the hardest times, the toughest days of recovery, the toughest days of fixing your situation, I guess. There's um, there's a guiding light right there, and that's Jesus. He can walk you through. He can take you through the storm, and all those cliche words, but it's actually true. I've lived it. There's been lots of storms since then. It doesn't mean life got perfect. I want to encourage you that maybe it could be discouraging, especially if there's I want to talk about relationship in particular, because Dawn brought up something from the recovery person who I was. There was a lot of patience because I thought, yeah, I'm fixed, I'm good. Why doesn't my wife love me anymore? And it's like, get in, strap in your belt, and get in for the long haul, because it's worth it. It's worth it because there's actually freedom. It's like I live a full life today. Yeah. So.
So good.
And
so
the other
Dawn,
thing,
go
no
ahead.
matter, it's just something that can, no matter what stage, whatever age you are, there's no bad age to do a pivot. There's no bad age to do a turning point where you actually start something absolutely brand new. I just met a guy the other day, not a recovery guy, but he was a t-shirt printer, and he said, you know what, I'm going to community college, I want to be a carpenter. 51 years old. I'm like, brilliant. there's no bad time to put a pivot on your life.
One life. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Dawn, I just want to ask you, and you did mention this, but someone who is supporting an addict, living with, trying to love through, what would you say to them?
Cool. So hindsight, right, is always 2020. I didn't walk it out in the best way possible. I'm grateful for the happy ending that we've received, and that we did stick it out. I isolated and shouldn't have. Find community. That's huge. Don't walk through it alone. I think that's a major thing that I would have changed for myself. And for me, it's like Kev said, it's a God thing. Like it's being in that place of surrender and going, I'm actually going to trust that you're a God that will make sense out of this mess. And that sounds so hard and like maybe not achievable for somebody that's in the throes of trying to walk out addiction with a loved one. But we've all got stories, right? And so you're just, if you look at it as a journey instead of as the sum of it, right? Like it's just one day at a time, and just buckle up, like Kev said. And so,
like if I was to go back, of course I would make different decisions knowing the outcome. But now that I've gone through the mess, obviously I would make different decisions. I wouldn't want to be a drug addict again. But on the other side of it, the mess is what's essentially crafted and created us to be the way we are. He's made a victory out of the mess, that we actually get to minister out of a place that was a mess. That's actually it's fixed, or it's renewed, it's restored. And I wouldn't actually trade that today. I feel much stronger because of that. So,
I wouldn't trade an ounce of the pain. I would walk through it 1,000 times to get to where we are today.
Really?
Absolutely. And it was bad. Like, it was infidelity. It was like heaps of lying. It was like hate, like ugly stuff for not a month, but like 4 or 5 years, and then years of healing. But I would absolutely do it again. You can't, for those of us that believe and know that our lives are not our own, like you don't get to decide how your story is going to end or what God's going to do with the hard parts of your life. Like, he doesn't make the mess, but he will allow you to walk through it if it's going to bring hope to other people. And so I wouldn't trade it. I just wouldn't.
Whoa. That's like, wow, guys. Because I think a lot of people, this is another show, but just about pain and hardship, and I think a lot of people, our culture and society has always been, we don't want pain or hardship. We're always trying to stay away from it and not deal with it or pretend it's not there. And I think what you're saying is really powerful, because stuff happens, bad stuff happens. Life is not easy, it's not fair, it's not good. It's And that's really powerful. I'm just sitting on that for a
The
second.
best parts of what we get to do in ministry, the best parts of our marriage, the best parts of our kids watching what husbands and wives do and hard stuff, like all the good stuff is birthed out of the worst days of our lives. So like I'm so grateful that I don't live a ho-hum life where I don't know the realness of God, and I'm not kind of sure on things, and I don't have purpose, and I don't like we have all that stuff in spades because we walked out really hard stuff. So just you got to hang on. Like if you're right, you just got to hang on because there is a God that will make sense of the mess, and not just make sense of it, but like use it in ways that you couldn't even fathom.
Yeah. Okay. In that, let's just quickly chat about. It makes sense the work that you're doing now. Like, it's not like so far off to say, oh, wow, we're so surprised at the Helm and what that center is. Just talk to us about it, the work that you're doing there, because I'd like as many people to know about it. I think it's a great ministry, a great center. Yeah. So, and maybe just quickly how you got to that place to do this, and then what it is, and then we'll finish up with a few final thoughts.
Yeah, so we've been back in. We've moved across the country a couple times in our marriage between Nova Scotia and BC. We ended up over the course of the last 10 years. We spent. We felt God call us into ministry, and we did exactly that. We worked in recovery ministry for about a decade in Langley, BC, and really fell in love with serving specifically broken and addicted people in the same situation that we had gone through. And anyway, a couple of years ago, we just felt a strong calling in our hearts to come back from BC back to Nova Scotia to start a year-long recovery program for men here in Halifax, and an area where we received healing. I say we because I went through a program here 18 years ago, but it gave me a second chance at life. And there's really nothing like that, especially not in the faith-based world of recovery here, where it offers a 12-month program for guys to come in and get restoration, purpose, and direction for their life. So, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what the Helm is in the program, Donnie.
Yeah, we're a 7-acre farm, very close to Peggy's Cove, which I know you love.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, we're tucked away enough from the city that we're trying to help buff that temptation to be right where things are easily accessible. But we're close enough that our guys can get connected with the local church and with community. And they'll spend a year here with us, hopefully. I mean, some will obviously leave sooner. Some will maybe stay longer. But their days are sort of half counseling, ministry, discipleship, classes, life skills, and then the second half of their day is working the property, working the farm, learning skills. We've got a commercial coffee roaster. We've got a wood shop to make things to sell. So they'll learn carpentry, they'll learn roasting. There's animals. We've got animals all over the place. We've got a mini farm,
right?
Sawmill
on the property where we mill our own.
Amazing.
Yeah, lots of cool things.
Yeah, capacity for 12 men. And we've got a house manager that lives here, and we'll feed them well and chapel every week and get them connected with church and get them connected with mentors and new community, healthy people to walk life out with. Yeah, that's where we're at.
That's incredible. See, I love that. I love the story where, you live it out, you see God do miraculous work, and then in that space, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna kind of like, we're gonna fill the need and do something that we know so intimately to then support. Like, I think that's what we mean when it's like we go through hard times and we can take that and be like, that's the worst, and now we're gonna like ignore it and walk away from it. But I am so encouraged and inspired by you two, because you take something that was so much of your lives that caused such great hurt, went through the healing process, saw a guy do some things, and then now you're doing the Helm. Like, it's amazing. It's actually one of those stories I wish, everybody needs to hear, because I think so many people should be doing the same thing. In some of the hardest experiences of their life, they could be helping people in the same areas that they needed help. And so just, honestly, I commend you and applaud and inspired by you that you're doing this, that you're doing the courageous work. And we need to ask, like, what is the greatest need? Like, how can we, who are listening, watching, help you in the needs at the Helm? What would be your greatest needs?
Prayer is always number one. And everyone thinks it's so cliche,
Okay.
but truthfully, like, we know all good things come from the one who's given us the vision for this and the resource to make it happen. So that's always first and foremost, is what we ask anyone that hears about the Helm. Local involvement in terms of volunteerism, and then also resource. Like, it's taken 3 years and $1 million to get to this point in fundraising, and it never stops because our residents will predominantly be on assistance and it won't cover their stay. And so that's just the reality. We hate that it comes down to money, but it just does. Helping people sometimes costs money. So that's...
I get that.
I've
been in the nonprofit world for a long time, so I get that, and ministry world. Any last thoughts as we're talking about Summer of Strength, or any last encouraging thoughts, Kevin, Dawn, that come to mind about just strengthening those in the areas that you know of, before we go?
I have just a small short word. It's a word that I felt when we felt a call to come back here to Halifax. I remember kind of wrestling with God on this area of, okay, do I go? Do I obey what I feel like we're supposed to be doing? We're supposed to start this new ministry, a recovery center. And I remember there was one specific day, and I get up pretty religiously at 5 a.m. and pray, and that's my routine, and it's important. And I said, finally, one day I said, fine, we'll do it. What do you want me to? Where do you want me to start? I don't even know where to start. Like, we're going to start a recovery center. We have no money. We don't have a plan. We don't have a name. And sometimes you hear God's audible voice, and I'm not sure everyone has their way they hear God's voice. And I heard God's voice as plain as day. Say, don't do nothing. And maybe that's for somebody right out there right now. Maybe it's someone who's walking through recovery. Maybe it's someone who's walking into like a new journey in their life, whatever it is. And I thought, don't do nothing is so vague. So what I did was I just did something. And that's the way faith works. It's just like saying, hey, you know what? I know I gotta do something. And when I do something, God fills in the other blanks that we can't fill in. And so I think that's probably a really good word for those, especially those struggling in addiction. If you're taking steps forward, especially if you're taking steps forward with with a God focus, you're saying, hey, God, I'm trusting you to get me to this next step. I'm just going to take a little shimmy forward. And I just believe that, he starts to fill in some of those puzzle pieces where they're impossible for us. They make no sense in an earthly position, but they make major sense in a kingdom position. So,
yeah,
that's my closing thought.
It's amazing. No, I love it. Dawn, anything, or did Kevin say it all, or do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, it's just though for those of us that know God, that know the Lord, and I remember I worked at the church in Langley. I worked at a church in BC, and our pastor shared this message, and he said this line, and I've heard it lots actually since, but I had never heard it before. This was probably going back 5-6 years. And it sounded harsh at the time, but I loved it. And it said, you weren't saved to sit. That's a sin. And I thought, it like struck me. And I wrote it on this whiteboard sticker that was on my office. And I meditated on it for a while. And it's kind of now who we are. I mean, it has been for a while, but like, everybody's got a story. He's given us all a testimony. Some people get saved as itty bitties, and that's their legacy, that they don't go through hardship. But then even that, share that. Like, we've all got a story to share. Mm-hmm. And if we have open hands and open hearts, God will do what he wants with that. And it's up to him how he uses us. But it's being in that place of not just sitting, like Kev said. Do something.
It's amazing. So good. Well, Kevin and Dawn, thank you so much for being on this episode of our SOS series, Summer of Strength. We are cheering you on. We're definitely going to be praying for you and the work that you do. And thank you so much for just your honesty in sharing your story and your life. I mean, it's, as a storyteller for me, to sort of rehash and bring it up again, there are moments I'm like, oh, right. But I think what's so beautiful is your story is an absolute love story, a redemption story of God and of the two of you. So proud of you guys, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Take care.